Welcome to the Live Unrestricted podcast, a show where you'll learn how to heal your relationship with food and your body so that you can focus your time and energy on more important things like your personal growth. I'm your host, Sabrina Magna, food freedom coach, and my mission is to help make your life happier and healthier without stress, overwhelm, or guilt about food. If you love the show, please do go out and share it. And if you're looking for support with your relationship with food, details about my programs are in the show notes. Thanks for spending time with me today. Now let's jump in. If you feel like you spend all of your time gathering more information on nutrition, weight loss, exercise, researching different diets, saving healthy recipes, following health and wellness influencers on Instagram, but you just end up feeling more overwhelmed, confused, and frustrating with eating, then this episode is for you. Today, we are joined by former biologist turned holistic nutritionist and host of the Weight Neutral Nutrition podcast, Devyn Derksen. She teaches a blend of intuitive eating principles, healthy habit change, and believes in an individualized approach to health. Devyn breaks down the science and the mindset of optimizing your nutrition without the typical diet culture BS. During our conversation, we talk about what analysis paralysis is when it comes to food and why more information about nutrition becomes counterproductive. We talk about the superiority complex of being health conscious. We discuss what is the breaking point that pushes people to decide to change and finally heal their relationship with food, the difference between eating disorders and disordered eating, how to start improving your health and eating habits by actually tuning out nutrition knowledge, what a facts and feelings journal is and how to use it, our thoughts on the Whole30 diet. We talk about short-term versus long-term nutrition and so much more. Devyn and I met a couple of months ago when I was a guest on her podcast, and we just had such an amazing conversation. So I was so excited to have her a guest on our podcast. So without further ado, let's jump into our conversation with Devyn.
Thanks so much for having me, Sabrina. I know it was a really big pleasure to have you on my show, so I'm super excited to be chatting with you again. And yeah, hopefully, I know what you're all about, you know what I'm all about. Hopefully we can teach people today a little bit more about how they can use the actual science and knowledge of nutrition to empower their anti-diet lifestyle. So yeah, super excited to chat with you today.
Yeah, and I think that's so important to talk about because when we talk about anti-diet or we talk about a non-diet approach to health, the most common misconception that I hear is it means just throwing your health out the window. And it's when we hear intuitive eating, a lot of people think it just means eat whatever you want, whenever you want, with no regards to your health or to how your body feels. And so is this something that you see a lot in your practice as well? Like this common myth that nutrition doesn't really matter when you start taking an intuitive eating approach or a non-diet approach?
Yeah, 100%. And I think it's so interesting to me because I really have to remind myself that most people are not in this realm, right? People come to us with a problem. They're not just well, I want to start intuitive eating. I mean, maybe they do say that, but most of the time there's other issues going on, right? They feel sluggish, they're tired, they feel out of control around food, things of that nature. So I think it's really important to think about it in that way. And I have to remind myself of that constantly. Not everyone knows what intuitive eating is. Yes. And I think I don't just go through the steps of intuitive eating, but I really use a client-led approach to use the tools from intuitive eating that make sense to people and kind of leave the rest, right?
Mm-hmm.
Not everybody needs to go through the whole motion, but a lot of those principles are going to be really, really helpful in an individualized way. So, yeah, I think it's really important for me anyway to bring in the science because I think a lot of us and a lot of people, especially who struggle with disordered eating patterns, obsession around food, who are super into dieting, we get these weird food rules and food thoughts in our mind that might not even be rooted in fact.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah. And I think that's really important because a lot of people are logic minded. And so when I'm trying to convey a concept to my client or I'm trying to help them see a different way, because when you are constantly, like you said before, which is so true, when you're constantly seeing the same thing over and over again, and I think the power of social media is so important because if all you have on your social media is you're following diet accounts or weight loss accounts or these really like filled with misinformation accounts by quote unquote health gurus that are telling you that sugar is toxic, that you're going to develop diabetes because of it, that carbs have to be limited. Your entire reality is that, and you honestly don't even know that there's a different reality. And I'm sure that when you look at your social media or your Instagram, your entire reality is, okay, how can we take a compassionate approach to health that is rooted in actual science and psychology? You know about intuitive eating, you know about, this whole new different approach to health. But these women, I always have to put myself in the shoes of where I was when I was struggling with my relationship with food. I honestly didn't know that there was another way. And I didn't know that there was a huge flaw in my thinking and in my logic. I really, truly did think that I needed to stop eating carbs. And I really did think that if I had a cookie a day or chocolate every single day, that I would end up developing diabetes and, high blood sugar and all that. So I think that's really important, and being able to translate the science that makes sense, then they're able to at least grasp on, okay, if this is rooted in science, if you're able to show me data that this is true, then I'm more likely to actually implement it into my life and be less scared of it.
Yeah, totally. And I think like it's kind of like where I come in with the individualized approach, because I think like some clients are very much like, they know the facts, right? Like they know the calories of every muffin they've ever eaten. They know like, all of the nutrition information. Like they don't need more information necessarily, but they need more information that is like practical to their lives. And I always give this example because I think it's helps to demonstrate what I mean here. So I had a client who was anemic. She had very low iron levels, and she came to me and she told me that, and we were working on it. And, she was kind of like, why am I having low energy? I'm taking the supplements my doctor's telling me to take, but I'm still feeling crappy. And so we kind of went through like what she was doing, and it turned out that she was having tea in the morning, caffeinated tea. And as many of us know, caffeine interacts with iron, and it's hard to absorb iron if you've just had caffeine. And that can be counteracted with vitamin C or different timing of the caffeine or different timing of the iron medication. So that's a really concrete example, I think, of using these facts, these nutrition facts, to empower you and to make you more aware of your situation. Whereas like if I had just told her like, well, you just need more iron, or, like it's so like individual. And I think there's a lot of things that we don't know, or maybe you heard one time like, oh, caffeine interacts with iron, but you didn't understand the implications.
Yes, 100%. And I have a very similar example. I was talking to one of my clients, and she was telling me how every afternoon I feel tired. I have really bad cravings. That's where I tend to go towards the sugar or the carbs. And I asked her like, okay, take me through the beginning of your day. And what I noticed was that she wasn't eating enough carbs in the morning and at lunch. And so of course, when afternoon came around, her energy was low and her body was craving those carbs. And so we know that sugar is going to be that quickest source of energy. So your body is so smart, and it's going to go towards that. And so we worked together, and I looked at, okay, what is your breakfast right now? And of course, when you're working with someone who has an unhealthy relationship with food, it can be very scary to start adding things that maybe you have been scared of in the past. And so looking at, okay, what's your breakfast looking like right now? How can we start making small adjustments that don't make you feel overwhelmed or anxiety ridden? And as she started adding carbs, she noticed, oh my God, my energy is better. My cravings aren't as bad. And I'm not thinking about food all morning long. And so from that, you build that momentum and that confidence of, okay, you know what? Maybe I am on the right track. So you become more adventurous. You start going outside of your comfort zone, and that builds so much trust in yourself. And so that's so true what you were saying. It's all about looking at, what am I doing? What are the different habits that I have, or different things that I'm doing? And a lot of people have a hard time noticing that in themselves.
Yeah, 100%. And I think like it's important to acknowledge here, and I'm sure you've seen this with your clients, that if you are in a state of like either just total exhaustion or like total obsession with food, it can be really hard to see anything, right? Like, with your client you just mentioned, like, to some of us, it seems obvious that she may have needed to add more carbs, but to the person who's really stuck in that mindset, like, it doesn't even occur to them. They're just like, oh, I'm so tired. Oh, I'm so like, I'm having these crazy cravings. It just like takes over your mind.
Yes.
And so I think that that's kind of like, not to toot our own horns here so much, but also to do that, like, that's where working with someone else who can come in and give that outside approach can be really powerful, I think.
Yeah, 100%. And I always say how like you don't see your own blind spots. And what you were saying before about more nutrition information is not the answer. A lot of the times, less information is what you need, because we get stuck in analysis paralysis, where we are taking in so much information and we're fed this lie that knowledge is power. And so if I know everything that I need to know about food, about the calories that I'm eating, then I'm more likely to make more informed decisions. I'm more likely to make better decisions. And that's actually, I'm sure that you've seen that that's not the case. And what do you think is the reason why that's not the case?
I think, like, honestly, like you mentioned it before a little bit, but there is a ton of misinformation out there. There is a ton of like things that just like aren't rooted in fact. There's, I won't mention this by name, but there is a large account, maybe you've seen them, and they just spread like all these crazy lies. It's the celery juice person, and I'm sure you've seen this person. But like I had come across a post from them that somebody had shared, and it was talking about how if you eat eggs, like they're so toxic for you and you're just like going to be so sick all the time. And I was like, well, I eat eggs every morning, so I guess I'm okay. But yeah, I think that's a part of it, is like just misinformation, people who maybe mean well, but just like are so entrenched in the diet thoughts, keto, intermittent fasting, like all of these trendy things. And yeah, I think like another part of it too is that gripping to wanting to know more, wanting to have all the information. And it's kind of a coping mechanism, right? It's a coping mechanism in the way of you're trying to control food because you feel out of control in whether it's around food or other things in your life or whatever. And you just feel like, okay, I'm going to arm myself with so much knowledge that I'm just going to be so in control. And that's not necessarily how it goes, right?
Yeah. And I remember when I was deep in my disordered eating, I really thought that I was as healthy as I've ever been, because I knew everything about food. I was tracking every single calorie I was eating. I was researching articles on nutrition and exercise in my free time. And I'm sure that a lot of people in your audience, the clients that you worked with, can relate to that. I know definitely I have so many clients who could write their own book on nutrition and weight loss. And really all that happens is that the very limited amount of space that you have in your brain for important information, for decisions, for things that matter, becomes progressively more and more taken up by nutrition information and thoughts about food. So much so that your entire day now revolves around obsessive thoughts about what you should or shouldn't be eating and the calories in your food. And we know that when that's whatever you focus on expands. And so if you're constantly focusing on food, then of course your behaviors are progressively going to change, but not necessarily in a positive way, because you feel out of control around food. You feel powerless. You feel like it's all you can think about. Your cravings are getting more intense and more intense until eventually no one can live that kind of life anymore. No one can be so rigid and focused on something that really, at the end of the day, is not going to matter that much.
Yeah. And I definitely think that for a lot of people, like for me, especially, like I totally relate to what you were saying there. I 100% was like spending a lot of time, like reading diet books, like poring over meal plans, like thinking about how to healthify recipes. Like I was totally doing those things. And, like I think that it's perpetuated by diet culture, but I was like, I am so much better than everyone else. Like, I am so much healthier. Like, no one else is as healthy or as cool as me. And like, I mean, obviously, I probably wasn't using those words, but it's true. Like, you feel like, well, I am up here and everyone else is just like doing their unhealthy thing over here. And I think that's like, I don't know. I don't think people like to think about that too much, but it's an important part of it is that you feel a sense of like moral superiority when you're on a diet or when you're like over exercising. And I think it's because our culture praises those activities and praises like adherence and discipline and all these things to the extreme. And so it's kind of just like, I think it's really hard to get out of that mentality, but you have to start by thinking like, is this actually serving me? Like, am I actually feeling well in mind, body, and spirit? Like, and for me, the answer was no. Like, I felt like garbage when I was at my thinnest. I was exhausted. I was bloated. I just, it just wasn't a good feeling. Yeah. And
I remember that is so accurate. And I've never really thought of it that way, but I remember when I was at like the quote unquote cleanest that I was in terms of the way that I was eating when I was like struggling with orthorexia. I used to look down on people and be like, you're going to use white flour for that cake. You're not going to use coconut flour or almond flour. Like, I really used to look down on people and the choices that they made, choices that really just reflected that they had a positive and relaxed relationship with food, that they didn't feel the need to be perfect all the time. And for me, I thought that was something that was wrong. And what you were saying about like, it takes some time to change that belief. It is absolutely true, because I know for me now, the biggest source of pride that I have is being able to eat foods that people would deem as quote unquote unhealthy, and being able to do it without guilt or without anxiety. When people make comments of like, oh, you're going to have that. I'm like, yeah, I will have that, and I'm going to enjoy it. And for me, that is such a source of pride, instead of thinking, oh shoot, like, should I really be having that? Does that make me lesser or, less healthy? It makes me feel so good that I have come to such a positive place with my relationship with food. And in turn, I'm sure that you can relate to this, my eating habits have actually become more consistent and more balanced because of it.
Yeah, 100%. And I think, like I said, it's really hard when you're in it, because I don't think that you necessarily are going to realize like maybe the negative effects until it reaches a point where you're like, I am exhausted. Like, I am feeling like so bad about myself. Like, I don't know. I would like to know your thoughts on this, honestly, because it's something that I think about is like, do you think people have to hit a certain point? Like, where is the point where people decide to change? And I don't know, I don't mean to like interview you, but like, I'm just like curious what you've noticed, like with your clients, with yourself. I don't know. I'm just curious.
I think the very first thing is, planting the seed that there might be something off, because a lot of the times when we're stuck in that, I honestly didn't think that there was anything wrong. I thought that it was normal, because we live in a society that normalizes these behaviors and mindsets. I honestly just thought that was what I needed to do to be healthy, and that other people just didn't care about their health. Like people who didn't eat perfectly, who didn't over obsess over how they were exercising or how they were eating. I really just thought, well, those people just don't really care. It was trying to see, it was when I first got introduced to the notion that maybe this actually isn't necessarily the best for me, and this is not necessarily healthy. And it's planting the seed. And I know a lot of the times when clients come to me, they're at different stages in their level of awareness. Sometimes they're still in that belief of, okay, can you tell me what to eat, what not to eat? Can you tell me what diet to go on? And then I have other people who maybe have been following me for a while. And it's when you find that one coach, or you find that one Instagram account, or you find that one podcast, that you start hearing things, you start seeing things differently, and you start shifting your perspective. And maybe the more you start looking into this, you learn about research, you learn about data, you learn about case studies of, okay, these are people who were where I was a couple of months ago, and here they are now. And I think that it really is a process. I don't think that you find out a different way. You find out about intuitive eating and overnight you're like, this is what I need to be doing, because these women have been doing the same thing for 20, 30 years. Their mindset is very fixed and they didn't even know that there was a different way. So I think it takes a lot of patience, especially for us as coaches, when we see someone who is starting to see a different way. You can't rush them to come to that decision on their own. They really need to come to that decision on their own.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally. I totally agree. And I just think it's interesting when I think back to my own journey, because I think like I really had like a rock bottom moment, and that like sticks with me in my mind. But then like after that, trying to heal and trying to figure out a better way it took me years. Like, you know, obviously I did it on my own, but like, it's tough stuff. Right. And it's like, it took me kind of like seeing myself in the mirror and being like, oh my God, I look like one of those people who like has an eating disorder. And I was like, oh, that's not good. Like I never thought of myself like as someone with disordered eating, but I was like, maybe I'll get there if I keep down this track. And I didn't want to do that. Right. So
yeah. And you minimize it. I was the same when I was actually looking back on some pictures of when I was at the deepest in my eating disorder. And I was so thin. And I remember that I thought I was fat. And back then I never would have thought I have an eating disorder right now. I minimized it. I didn't tell anyone about it. And the more that I've done this work and I've come out completely on the other side, now I'm able to look back on it and say with full certainty, yeah, you were struggling with an eating disorder. And just because you didn't tell anyone, just because you didn't consult, just because you didn't go to therapy, it doesn't minimize the fact that you had an eating disorder. And it's really difficult when you're going through it to realize that and to notice that, okay, maybe I actually need some help on this.
Yeah, totally. And I think a lot of people too think of like an eating disorder as like, well, I don't have bulimia, like I'm not doing those things, so like I'm fine. And that was me. I was like, oh no, like I'm not even in that. But yeah, totally. Like, was it a disorder? I don't know, but it was definitely disordered in nature.
Yes.
So like, I think that even that is like worthy of getting help or worthy of changing or worthy of like paying extra mind. It doesn't have to get super, super crazy bad before you admit that there's something wrong, right?
Yeah, and that's what I always say to women in my community is you don't have to wait until your marriage falls apart or until your health is you're facing severe health consequences or until your daughter develops an eating disorder for you to finally get the help that you need. You don't need to be sick enough. If right now you are living a life that doesn't feel fulfilled, that doesn't feel happy, that doesn't necessarily feel mentally or physically healthy, that you feel like your entire life revolves around food and your weight, that right there is your indication. That should be kind of that red flag of, okay, something needs to be done about this. But I do want to switch gear a little bit. And we were talking before about women who think that if I just gather more information on nutrition and on carbs and on calories, then my eating habits are going to improve. And we've kind of debunked that. And we know that more nutrition information is actually not the answer. And sometimes taking a step back and learning how to get rid of some of that or to clear that brain space is what you need. And so how do you start changing your eating habits or start working on your relationship with food without gaining more knowledge and taking in the science of nutrition? Like, how do you toe the line there?
Yeah. So actually, like I have my clients create a little, if it's appropriate for them, a little facts and feelings food journal. So they don't write out portions, no calories, nothing like that, but they're going to write out their meals and they're going to write out like how it made them feel. And the point of this exercise is to turn yourself inward. You talked about like gathering more knowledge and more information. I think that instead of looking externally to the carbs and the calories and whatever, we are going to turn internally and gather that information there. So again, it's client led. It depends on the situation. Like sometimes we use things from the intuitive eating book about the hunger and fullness cues. And sometimes it's more just like, you know, I was having a lot of cravings after this meal. I was having a lot of, you know, maybe like indigestion after a certain other meal. Again, it very much depends, but I think that the key theme here is that instead of gathering knowledge about external cues, we're gathering knowledge about our own bodies and how we feel and how the foods are making us feel.
Yes, I do the exact same thing with my clients. I call it a food and mood journal. And it's the same thing. And I like to have action steps for anyone who's listening. So if you are someone who is constantly going online and trying to learn more about nutrition and weight loss advice, here's something that you can focus on this week instead. That's going to be a lot more productive. You can call it whatever you want, facts and feelings, food and mood, or just a journal in general. And one thing that's really important about these, I'm sure that you can agree, is we're not tracking portion sizes. We are not tracking calories. We're not tracking carbs. Like we're not meticulously tracking and measuring the food. We want to get a sense of what am I eating right now? So if you're having a chicken breast with raw chicken breast with steamed broccoli. And then after that, you're feeling maybe not completely satisfied or you feel like something is missing. Okay, what might be going on here? Did I actually enjoy the food that I was eating? Was I eating it at a counter while I was distracted or doing other things? Do I feel full? Do I feel like something's missing? Maybe I need to add some carbs or some fat to my meal. Really just, I call it like looking at it as a scientist and looking at it as data. And I love that you said, instead of trying to gain more external information, why don't we just turn inwards and gain some internal information? Because your body is going to be the best guide for you. And if you're constantly following information that's being, you know, spread to a million people are going to have a million different bodies too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 100%. And I think a good example of this, like I gauged what the client needs, but one client came to me and her main complaint was low energy. So I had her do this exercise and like she wasn't really struggling with like obsessive food thoughts as much as she was like super, super low energy. And when we look back at her food journal, I was like, well, all you ate today was a bowl of cereal and a cup of soup. Like, of course you don't have any energy. And she was like, yeah, I see that now. Like writing it down, you know, like she had a very, very busy life. Sometimes you forget to eat. Sometimes like it just doesn't take priority. But I think like monitoring is helpful. Again, you don't want to like over monitor. I think there's a fine line there, especially if someone has a disordered relationship with tracking food. It can be a little bit of a tougher situation to navigate. And that's when you kind of have to maybe start somewhere else or maybe like bring in different supports. But yeah, like I think just focusing on the internal cues, like focusing on your energy levels, your cravings, your moods, your digestion, like all these things are going to be way more empowering than like reading the calories off of your bread.
Yes. And I think that's so important. What you were saying before is if you have an unhealthy relationship with tracking or an unhealthy history with MyFitnessPal, for example, this is where working with someone, working with a coach, a dietitian, a therapist, whatever it is, with some support to help meet you where you're at. Because a lot of the times when it comes to intuitive eating or going on a food freedom journey, all of these steps are going to be important, but the order is going to be really important as well, and the timing. If you are trying to implement gentle nutrition when you haven't really healed your relationship with food and you're still afraid of it, and you're trying to improve your eating habits, but from a place of an unhealthy relationship with food, that's not the right time for you. And being able to talk to someone who says, you know what, maybe based on where you're at right now, we should start here instead of doing the food and mood journal, which might trigger more obsessive thoughts about food. Let's do a different approach and let's take it individual to where you're at right now.
Totally. Yeah, I know. I think you're so right. Like, I think people read the intuitive eating book and they maybe don't, like, first of all, it can be overwhelming. That is like a pretty clinical book. And I think people are just like, oh yes, gentle nutrition, I will start there. And it's like, that's actually the last step. Like, calm down. So
yeah, absolutely.
I think it's interesting you mentioned that, because I think that that's so true. I think people who aren't familiar are just like, yes, I will start there.
Yeah. And what you were saying before, how you had that client who, for her, it wasn't so much the obsessive thoughts, but it was more so she was so busy and overwhelmed and running around all day. And I think that's where also knowing what kind of eater you are can be super important. When we talk about intuitive eating, we know that you can be a careful eater, you could be a professional dieter, you could be an unconscious eater, or you could be an intuitive eater. And if you are an unconscious eater, then this could be a really good tool for you. However, if you're a super careful eater or you're a professional dieter, then that might not be where you want to start. And so knowing where you stand, I always say, like, awareness is the first step to change, is going to be so important, so you know which action steps to take based on your specific situation.
And I think something that's coming to my mind right now is like, diets and diet companies and diet culture in general literally discourages you from turning inwards. So that I think is why it's so important for it to be the first step. You know, I like to shit on the Whole30 because it is just like so arbitrary and weird to me.
Yeah.
But, you know, I had a friend once who was like, I'm doing Whole30. And I was like, okay, why? And she's like, oh, I'm just trying it. Don't judge me or whatever. I was like, okay. But like, it just like actively encourages you to not care about your cravings, to not pay attention to what your body actually needs, to not even think about nutrition because it like doesn't allow legumes. And I'm like, well, legumes are super healthy. So actually, like, you know, it just like, it gives you all of these external things to pay attention to, and is like, disregard internal feelings until the 30 days is up and then go wild.
Yeah, it's like, it's basically what I refer to it as, like, you know, when you have a cork floating in water and you just push it down, and then you create more and more pressure as you try to push it down. And then eventually when you let go, of course, it comes bubbling up to the surface and, you know, it pops up. And that's the same thing. It's like you're pushing down all this information that your body is telling you for 30 days. And then we're shocked that on day 31, it all comes rushing back, and it comes rushing back with a vengeance because you've been pushing it down for so long.
Yeah. And because you've been ignoring your internal cues for so long, like, your body is smart. Your body tells you things and it wants what it wants when it wants it.
Yeah.
Like, so if you don't want to listen, then yeah, eventually it's going to rebel against you.
Yeah. You said something before, which caught my attention, which is, when people are going on a new diet, Whole30, and they say, I'm just trying it. And we say it very blatantly. We say it very innocently and kind of like laissez-faire. And one of the biggest things that I see is that people don't stop and ask themselves, what are the long-term implications of this? And because if diets came with a list of side effects that come along with it, no one would ever try it. But we are in such a short-term gratification, quick fix society. And yeah, we might be thinking it's only 30 days, right? How bad could it be? But we don't look at, okay, what is going to be the implication on my relationship with food, on my relationship with my body? I'm currently talking to someone who is telling me all of these different pills that she's been recommended to take that are basically meant to reduce her appetite and reduce her cravings. And it might seem really nice and really sexy for the short term, but I had to explain to her, think of how confusing this is going to be for your body. What you're telling your body right now is all of these signals that you've been sending me about what I need, about maybe I need more food, maybe I need more sugar, maybe I need more carbs, whatever it is. I'm going to shut it down and I'm going to say that I can't listen to you. And so in the long run, food just becomes so frustrating and overwhelming because you cannot trust or listen to yourself anymore.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's sad.
Yeah.
Right. Like it's true. And yeah, you're right. Like I never thought about it that way, but yeah, if diets came with a list of side effects, like no one would agree to starting one.
No.
That's pretty funny, actually. I might tell people that.
Yeah. And the same thing,
Sabrina.
like imagine you went to a doctor and they were like, okay, we have this medication for you, whatever you're struggling with. And, it only has a 5% success rate. But on top of that, even if it does work, you're going to live the rest of your life obsessed with taking this medication and you're going to have a bunch of side effects.
Yeah.
But we also have this different solution that is meant to work 100% of the time and there are no side effects except for positive relationships with food in your body. Right. Which one would you rather?
Right.
But no one ever presents it that way because I don't think that people really stop and notice how smart diet industry companies and programs really are, and like their marketing is run by experts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think that, like, I don't know, this is like a bit of a sidebar, but like I have noticed such a shift in the marketing of diet companies, even in the last like 2 years, I think, because people are getting wise to it, I think is what's going on here. And I think they're really trying to use like the power of psychology and like, oh, it's not a diet. It's like a
lifestyle,
fixing your mindset and you like, yeah, improving your lifestyle and like all these things. And I just like, I don't know. It's
incredibly
crazy.
Frustrating. It's incredibly frustrating for people who are actually doing that and who are trying to undo the damage from those very same companies. I'm sure that maybe Noom came to mind. Noom that loves to pretend that it's super psychology focused, yet giving you red light, green light, yellow lights on certain foods and encouraging 1,200, 1,500 calorie diets. It's very true. And I'm sure that we could have a whole other conversation about the marketing that diet culture has developed. But I want to wrap things up. And so if someone is right now finding themselves in analysis paralysis, they can look at their social media and they see that they are constantly saving healthified recipes and it's all diet and weight loss, accounts. And they want to get to a point where they do feel like they need to improve their eating habits, but they don't know how to go about it without obsessing over calories and carbs. Where do they start?
Yeah, I think it's just going to be, again, like I said, about turning inward. Like, just ask yourself, like maybe like one meal in the next 2 days, take a meal, preferably alone, although if you have a partner or kids, like it might be hard. And just like no technology, no distractions, like just sit with that meal, eat it, and take note of your feelings. And I know that can be hard. Like, honestly, I'm not the most mindful eater a lot of the time. I do eat at my desk. I do eat in front of the TV. Like, let's be honest. But I feel like I can do that now. But I think
and that's important is like, it's like learning how to drive a car. At first, you're going to have to be really hyper focused on what you're eating and how you're feeling. Yeah. But eventually it becomes such an easy skill. I'm the same. At first, I used to have to do it. No distractions. Now I often eat while I'm working or I'm doing other things, but it happens on such an easy level that like overeating is not really a thing for me because paying attention to my body just happens as easy as like when you need to pee, you go pee. When you need to sleep, you go sleep. It becomes easy. And so if at the beginning you feel like you're being hyper focused on the food that you're eating, just know that it doesn't last forever and it becomes easier over time.
Yeah. So I think that that's a thing, really tangible thing people can do right away is like have a mindful meal. Another thing I always tell my clients is like, go through your social media, get rid of diet accounts, get rid of accounts that make you feel bad. Like if this account pops up on your feed and you're like, you feel kind of yucky afterwards, like unfollow, like just do it. You know, you can refollow later if you feel like you must, but like,
if you feel like you want to feel bad about yourself again, go ahead and refollow in a couple of weeks.
I know. And like, so anyway, those are like the main things. And then just like I said, you know, turning inward, like, doing whatever like you need to do. I think finding healthy coping mechanisms is a really good tool, although that's like a whole other thing that we could talk about for a million years. But
and as you were talking, I thought about one more really tangible thing, which is if you're someone who is used to overanalyzing food labels, it might be a really good idea for you to actually take a break, like go turkey from looking at food labels, because all that's going to do is it's going to make you feel like eating is a math equation in terms of calories and carbs and sugar. And so it could be a really good idea if you're someone who feels like you're constantly taking in too much external information to take a break. And I always tell my clients, if you need to take a break from nutrition labels, it doesn't mean that you can't go back to being interested in, okay, what kind of ingredients are in here and kind of comparing one food to another. But you can only really do that once you have a healthy relationship with food.
Yeah, totally agree.
Yeah. So Devyn, where can people find you, connect with you if they're interested in working with you, having more of a personal approach, or they want to follow you on Instagram? Where can they find you?
Yeah, for sure. So the main part is if you're a podcast listener, which obviously you are if you listen to the show, I host my own podcast as well. It's called the Weight Neutral Nutrition Podcast. You can find it anywhere podcasts are available. I am on Instagram as well at Devyn.Derksen. I'll spell my name out loud. DEVYN .DERKSEN. No one has ever spelled my name right ever in my whole life. So I just like
not surprised.
Yeah, I know, right? So, but I'm sure you'll put that all like in the show notes and whatnot, link it there so people can find it.
Exactly. Yeah. Yes. Well, thank you so much, Devyn. Like you said at the beginning, we had so much fun when I was a guest on your podcast. I was so excited to have you on mine. And thank you so much to everyone who is listening here today. And we will see you on the next episode. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. If you found it valuable, I would love if you would share it with someone you know that could benefit. If you're loving the show, don't forget to subscribe over on Apple Podcasts so you don't miss a single episode. I really love hearing feedback from you, so please leave a rating and review over on Apple to help us get in the ears of more people who need it the most. Finally, come hang out with me on Instagram at Sabrina Magna Health for more educational content and get up close and personal with me. Thank you so much for being here, and I'll see you on the next episode. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. If you found it valuable, I would love if you would share it with someone you know that could benefit. If you're loving the show, don't forget to subscribe over on Apple Podcasts so you don't miss a single episode. I really love hearing feedback from you, so please leave a rating and review over on Apple to help us get in the ears of more people who need it the most. Finally, come hang out with me on Instagram at Sabrina Magna Health for more educational content and get up close and personal with me. Thank you so much for being here, and I'll see you on the next episode.